We are now live streaming on YouTube. Dun, dun, dun. Oh, it says it's starting in 5 minutes.
Oh, it says live on here.
I know.
Serious.
Maybe if I. Oh, there it is.
Okay,
Aha, I
here
got
we
it.
are.
Cool.
Cool, great.
Awesome.
Awesome.
So we're officially in?
Yeah, we are officially in.
All right, cool.
Okay, so we can officially start.
Officially.
So today I want to talk about how to wait on God. It's related to some of the Bible talks that I was recently listening. And the chapter they are talking about is in Luke chapter 8, started from verses 41. I guess everyone were very familiar with this story because last Sunday we James talked about this story, but that person he was trying to explain from a different perspective. So I just want to bring up this scripture again. This in Luke 8, chapter 41. Then a man named Jairus, a synagogue leader, came and fell at Jesus' feet, pleading with him to come to his house because his only daughter, a girl of about 12, was dying. As Jesus was on his way, the crowds almost crushed him, and a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years, but no one could hear her. She came up behind him and touched the edge of his cloak, and immediately her bleeding stopped. Who touched me? Jesus asked. When they all denied it, Peter said, Master, but people are crowding and pressing against you. But Jesus said, Someone touched me. I know that power has gone out from me. Then the woman, saying that she could not go unnoticed, came trembling and fell at his feet. In the presence of all the people, she told why she had touched him and how she had been instantly healed. Then he said to her, Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace. So we will stop here for now because the part I want to talk about is because there are two people showing the story. One is this woman who's bleeding for 12 years, and then the other one is Jairus. He was trying to call Jesus to save his daughter. So when the Jesus was trying to save this woman, the Jairus might be very anxious and worried because this woman has been bleeding for 12 years. But Jesus take patience with the woman instead of trying to save his daughter. So there is a moment, I think, in our life is a similar situation. Like we want to God to answer our request, but God's answer is wait a moment. So I was just want to ask everyone, how do you respond or react when you are requesting something or you want to pray in something where God's answer for you is wait for a moment? I can share my stories first. I think there were two moments that I was trying to pray very hardly, and I want to get my request. I want to get the response from God. The first time is when I was trying to get a job, because I was in a job searching for a very long time because I'm a foreigner. So I could find only computer science related job, and also they have to offer sponsorship in order to keep me working here. So in order to find a job, I keep searching for half a year, and I keep praying every day. And at that time, I think one of the story that inspired me is praying with persistent. So that is also a story in the scripture. A woman wants justice from God, but she couldn't get it. And I was heard that story. So there's a time I was going to quit, but someone told me that story, and then I was keep reading that story, and I believe that like keep praying with persistence, and eventually we will get some consequences. And the other situation is the situation I'm facing now because I have an immigration issue, and this year I cannot get past it. And also the same issue, Joyce and Sean also have this immigration issue. And because of the coronavirus, the immigration becomes harder and harder. I think for us, Joyce and I talked yesterday, and she was trying to persuade me to pray sincerely and still keep the faith, and just not worry about it tomorrow, but focusing on every day, like current life.
Excuse me. Thanks for sharing. It's funny. I think my knee-jerk thought, my knee-jerk response to the question is just work, like getting a job, all those times in life where I've been job hunting and there was no certainty. I'm sure there have been other moments as well where God has asked me to wait and I even recognized it, but I was probably more willing to wait because it was something I perceived as lower stakes. Like waiting for, I don't know, a plan to come to fruition, a surprise, or waiting to hear back on someone's response to would you study the Bible or are you going to be baptized? Although that is phrased weirdly when I prefaced it by low stakes. But what I mean to say is I am more personally confident in the response from the individual. So I don't feel like I'm waiting for an uncertainty. But like with a job, there's just that I need to decide, or I'm looking for a job. I need something to pay the bills. And I also don't know their decision. I don't know if I'm a shoo-in. I don't know what's going to happen. And if they say no, I don't know what I'll do next. And I feel like, I guess this says more about me than anything else. I feel like I don't necessarily have a lot of situations that I bring about in my life where there are massive uncertainties. And the uncertainties that I do have are less so or not as crazy to predict or account for. Their impact doesn't have that massive reverberation in my life. So it's interesting because I'm sure I've been asked a lot of times and I'm sure I've probably handled them really well, but I don't know if I've ever been in a position where I was like Jairus and I'm like, no, my daughter is dying. Do not waste your time kind of thing with God. Like, please answer my prayers right this moment or, I'm going to turn.
Yeah. I kind of hate to keep on with this subject of jobs, but so last year, basically after the end of my first year of school, I've been trying to get an internship, and I applied for probably 30 some internships, and most of them went nowhere. And then but I don't know if back then I had perceived that as God telling me to wait.
Mm-hmm.
But now that I think about it, if I had waited, everything would have just been fine. Or at least while I was going through it, I wouldn't have been as stressed or as anxious or whatever. Just because I feel like I needed experience and I didn't really do an internship the previous summer. So it was okay, I need to go and do something. And so out of all the places I applied to, only one responded, and that was Google. And when they responded, basically some stuff went down where the position that I originally applied for, they weren't offering it anymore, and so that hurt a lot. And so, but I hadn't gotten a rejection letter or a rejection yet, and so Josue knows. I don't know if he remembers, but there was this whole period of just not hearing anything, and then 2 months later, they hit me back, and there was another position, and everything went well. And so I think when those periods come, I think I kind of just waver in unbelief. All that's to say that I think when I feel like I'm having to wait, or during those periods where I look back and I see that God was making me wait, I think during that time I'm oh well, it's probably just not gonna happen. Yeah.
Yeah, no. I definitely think that for me, job things, of course, when I was applying for colleges, like I was begging God, like, please tell me where I need to go. Like, and that became a whole ordeal where it was like down to the last minute, God answered that prayer of, where do I need to go? To which, Pittsburgh became the obvious choice, or even just with, coming up with various plans, or even figuring out certain feelings, or with certain mental health or other health conditions of God, like I just want to be healed of this, or I just want relief from whatever have you. And because this is going on the internet, I'm not going to go into too much detail, but I've definitely gone through that time of where I felt the weight of someone else's sickness and wanting for them to be healed, and earnestly praying, like, God, please help them get through this challenging time. And where it just seemed like he wasn't really doing much, and gratefully so, like, we got to a point where it was fully surrendered to God, of like, okay, this will be fine. Like, God is going to pull you through um, in this moment and in this time, and he is with you in this sickness. Just to not kind of get into too much detail because it is someone else's life, but that was a hard time for me because I was angry, like, God, like, I want this person to get past this health challenge. And it's definitely hard whenever God's like, not yet. You're like, what? Well, why not? Why not yet? Come on, like, just tomorrow, and I've gone through that too myself, whether it's like um, with my ebbs and flows of random spurts of lows in my mental health, and just being like, God, can I please get out of this? And he's like, no, I need to show you something right now. And I'm like, dang it, okay. But yeah, I definitely think we've all kind of had to experience that moment of like, wait a second, because we have our own timetable, and God's like, no, my timetable is better.
Is there anyone going to share anything else, or shall we move on?
For me, there's definitely been a lot of different times in which it's usually a long waiting period, or just sort of a time of, well, we need to wait and see. I could definitely share about jobs, but we've already shared about that enough. But I think it even comes into play with relationships. I've been a part of the church for about 12 or 13 years now, and there have definitely been different opportunities to pursue relationships. Specifically, pursuing relationships for dating, or already in a dating relationship and trying to pursue a marriage relationship. And some of those pursuits have taken me to other cities. One of those pursuits took me to the other side of the world. And ultimately, those did not work out. I do remember my perspective when, both initiating in those relationships, as well as when it came time for those to end, which was being able to, because I had already experienced pain and loss and sadness before in other pursuits. And so knowing that my mindset had to be, okay, it's not as though that this is going to work out. I'm not owed anything. I'm not guaranteed to find or have a relationship or anything like that. And so um, yeah, I had already felt that sting a few too many times early on, and so my perspective needing to change to, if if God sees me as someone who is going to be capable, or even just in a good place mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, to be able to lead in a relationship, he'll then he'll make that clear. that if I'm ready, not to say that there's some threshold that you have to get to. It's, oh, you know what, you're grade A certified for dating. Like, that doesn't exist, and anyone that tells you that is ridiculous. But yeah, I definitely think that having that perspective of, if I'm going to be ready, if I'm going to be responsible and capable, and if my mind is focused on God and not focused on the other person in that relationship. I mean, obviously, you know, having more focus on God than just focusing on the other person, because I would want to be worshiping God in that relationship and not end up having a relationship that just worships that other person, because that's just not going to work. But yeah, basically just having a continuous prayer of, God, this may work out, this may not work out, this may never work out, but if it is going to work out, build me into the type of man that can be responsible and spiritual and capable of being able to pursue this. And if I'm not now, help me to become that way, and help me to just focus on being able to enjoy you and to not pursue you just so that I can have this relationship. Yeah, I don't know if that rambled too much, but I hope that I hope that there was some clarity there.
I don't have much experience about a relationship, but I really appreciate your stories.
Was there?
Okay, let's move on to the next part. Is there so we stopped at verses 49. And here it says, while Jesus was still speaking, someone came from the house of the Jairus, the synagogue leader. Your daughter is dead, he said. Don't bother the teacher anymore. Hearing this, Jesus said to Jairus, don't be afraid, just believe, and she will be healed. When he arrived at the house of Jairus, he did not let anyone go in with him except Peter, John, and James, and the child's father and mother. Meanwhile, all the people were wailing and mourning for her. Stop wailing, Jesus said. She's not dead, but asleep. They laughed at him, knowing that she was dead, but he took her by the hand and said, my child, get up. Her spirit returned, and at once she stood up. When Jesus told them to give her something to eat, her parents were astonished, but he ordered them not to tell anyone what had happened. So this part is Jesus eventually saved Jairus' daughter. But I think, so when I was reading this part, I always so inspired by the word Jesus said, don't be afraid, just believe. Because this part is one of the part that we talked about in the winter retreat. So every time I was reading this part, I just recall the I don't know his name, but I remember the preach that we got at the winter retreat, and he was saying there are lots of situations in your life like you think it's dead, but it's not dead. We should just believe. But from another perspective, I would like say there are many situations in our life. God told us to wait a moment, but the final answer is no. So what's everyone, do you have does anyone has a situation like God's finally turned the door closed and his answer is no, and how does everyone respond to that? For me, so my current immigration issue is definitely a no, because I didn't get work visa this year. That means I have to leave next year, though I have to try lots of ways to extend my student visa, but it still doesn't work out. So there is a very high possibility that I have to leave at the end of this year. So I was talking to Joyce, and she was trying to comfort me. And then I figured out it's like no matter where I go, I should believe that God is always with me. Instead of worrying about it tomorrow, where shall I go? What place should I stay? It's better for me to keep praying every day and keep trusting in God that He has the best plan for me. If I put focus only on God and believe He's always with Him, then I will have the power and to move me forward for my everyday life. So what is everyone else's thoughts?
I really appreciate your openness and your vulnerability in wanting to share your heart and your situation. Yeah, I mean, it's very reminiscent, I think, of what happened to the church in the first century when we get to read pretty early on in Acts. I mean, by Acts, I think it's right about right around Acts 3, 4, 5. That's when the church begins to get persecuted, and then the persecution becomes heavier. It becomes much more intense. And so from the get-go, one would think, okay, if this is supposed to be the church of God, if we're supposed to be following in the true way, if Jesus is risen, if something absolutely incredible has happened, why on earth are things going so poorly for us right now? Things are going pretty rough, right? And so those are some valid thoughts to have. But we also get to go in and look at how much the church was being persecuted at that time and what came of it. Because of that persecution, the gospel was spread to many, many different places. Saul, who was heavily persecuting the church, throwing people in prison, was supervising the execution of Christians, ends up becoming one of the biggest proponents of Christianity and of the gospel. And so for whatever was going on, for however many people may have ended up being put in prison or having their property confiscated, being ridiculed by their neighbors, having family members that didn't want to be around them anymore, having to flee, having to travel great distances, losing jobs, losing their lives. Despite all of that, the gospel continued to spread, and it did exactly what no one was expecting. Everyone was expecting it to just fizzle out into nothing or to be destroyed, but instead the very opposite happened, and it became a very, very real faith that has spread throughout the entire world. And so just showing that despite the incredible hardships that come our way, that there's still something absolutely phenomenal that can happen. So God can do amazing things with our struggles.
Yeah, that's our topic in the last few weeks. Miracle in mayhem.
Yep.
I always think back to man, I don't even remember how many years ago this was. Probably like 8. I was looking for a job, and it was funny. I was working at a Brugger's at that time, and it was across the street from a law firm, or whatever. And so I got really familiar with a lot of people that would come from that law firm into the Brugger's. And one day, one of them was like, "Wait, you went to school for graphic design, correct?" I was like, "Yeah." Well, I can't do it because I work for HR, but we're hiring our 2 friends, or essentially friends at that point, can put your name down as a recommendation and we can get an interview lined up. I was like, "Oh, okay, that's cool." So I sent in a resume and I wasn't really expecting anything. And I was called in for an interview. And I went in, and my friend Dina was her name. She was the one who worked in HR, and she's like, "Okay, before your interview, let's sit down. I want to help you get ready for the interview." Gave me a lot of tips. She did a lot of research for me. She was like, "Well, this is how much a graphic designer makes in the area. Since this would be your first job as a graphic designer, we can lowball it a little bit to make you look more appealing, like just everything." It was awesome. I didn't even ask that of her. And so I went in for the interview, and they liked me. They're still interviewing other people. And every day they would come in and they would report, "Oh, we had 3 more interviews today." I didn't like any of them, and I keep telling the hiring manager, let's keep a sweat in mind. Let's just keep them on the table, we'll see how it plays out. And I kept talking, and more lawyers from that firm would come in and like, oh, hey, how's it going? Are you applying? I'll put in a good word for you. So it was really cool. It was just awesome, like seeing all these people kind of just put in a good word. And it ultimately led to me being in the final two. And so it was just really awesome along that journey. I was like really excited, like, man, this is really cool that things just kind of worked out that way. And then ultimately I didn't get the job. And I was totally okay with that. The entire experience was honestly so much fun. And I really enjoyed everything about it. I was like, it was so cool just seeing like all the little pieces kind of come together. It was great seeing God just kind of like weave this funny little tale together. And I was like, man, that's like, it stinks I didn't get the job. Like, it would have been cool. The building was nice. But oh well, no big deal. And honestly, I was nearing the end, like, I don't know if I want to work with a bunch of lawyers. Not too long after I got the rejection, a company I had interviewed with a few months prior called me up. They were like, hey, Josue, we wanted to know, are you still interested in working for us? I was like, yeah. They're like, great, awesome, come on in. So I came in the next day, and they were like, so I came in dressed up because I was expecting an interview. It was like, do you always go to work at Brugger's dressed up? I'm like, no, I thought this was an interview. No. We're literally offering you the job. We just wanted to make sure you were in it. Oh yeah. And then they had been waiting, honestly, like 3 or 4 months until a position opened up that I had stated that I would only work for. And they were like, we want you to work here. Like you were great, everything like that. And you've been on our mind, and every opportunity we want you in. So it was just awesome because I definitely, throughout that entire experience, I was like, man, I enjoy the people I interact with at Brugger's, but this isn't the job I want. And the law firm was great. And it was a great little holdover. And at the end of it, when I had that, I was like, you know what, that was fun. And I have total faith that God will see me through these scenarios again. And to reach that point, and God basically was like, oh, good, he learned his lesson. Here you go. They've been waiting for you. And it was a great few years that I worked there, and it was really formative and really helpful, and led to a lot of great things from there. But yeah, it was just crazy because it's one of those moments where I can see like God clearly said no about the job at the law firm. And I think a lot of people in my position, even my friends from that job, were like, we're so sorry, we kind of felt like we got your hopes up or something. It's like, no, it was great. It was fun. I really appreciated it. And to then just be able to go literally, like, I think it was within a week, and just go to my manager and be like, hey, I've really liked working here. I'm putting in my 2 weeks notice because I got a job offer. And to go from there was just exciting, and really just showed like how God can use experiences to shape up our faith, and then also still reward us when it seems like we get a no.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really appreciate it, and I admire you that you really enjoy all the process instead of focusing on only the results.
Yeah.
Definitely a challenge now for me, but at the time it was fun.
Yeah, one thing I can think of, I'm gonna just roll with the jobs. So I was applying for a job, and this was a year ago. And so I had one job at the bookstore on CMU's campus, but I had to take less hours. And so I needed another job because I needed more money. And so I applied for this phone-a-thon job. I don't know why it's funny, but it's funny. So I applied for this phone-a-thon, like one of them jobs where you just call people and like ask for money. Anyway, so yeah, I went all the way through the process, and so during the whole time I had been praying for it, and this was maybe over like 2 or 3 weeks. But like I got the job, like I literally got the job, but um, and like so I got the job. I had filled out all the sorry, yeah, I filled up like all the paperwork and everything, and then I was still sort of praying about it, and then I'm sorry, guys. I'm sorry. So I filled out all the paperwork. Let me finish this up. I filled out all the paperwork, and basically, God was basically telling me like, "Yo, don't take this job." And so I just had to tell him like, "Yo, I can't take the job." Like I had to like basically rebuttal, which felt really, it felt really bad to do, and I think a lot of the reason that I wanted to take the job because I was like super insecure about just how much money I had and not being able to like, I guess, support myself throughout the semester. But and so I guess having God say no and then having to like turn down the job, I think it was a little scary, but I think it felt better to know that I was being obedient. And so I took a lot of solace from that. And then to look back now and just to see like the way God took care of me during the semester, it makes it like worth it. So yeah.
Nice.
Very cool. Thanks for sharing.
Okay, I guess most of us are in a very optimistic attitude because we always believe there is hope and there is a turning point in our actual life and there is a turning point. But I think the other thing I want to mention is about some people, they don't have this turning point, especially this coronavirus situation. Lots of people lost their families or they have a disease for themselves. I believe they keep praying every day for God to save their families, to save their friends. But some people eventually has to lose their friends or family or their own life during this hard time. So I think in that situation, the final answer is still in this part of scripture instead of a turning point. I think the final answer for this one is the resurrection. So I think most of the situation that we have currently, we lost something and we get it back. We didn't see the hope, but eventually we get to see the hope. We can have a change point or something. That is a temporary answer, but I think an alternative answer for most of us will be the resurrection, because someday we have to die, every one of us, and then we don't have any chance to bring the life back again, but eventually we'll get a resurrection. So I think whatever situation that we're facing right now, we should keep praying and pray for the hope and thankful for God for whatever he gives us and whatever he plans for us. And that's all I want to talk about today.
Hope it's fun.
Nice. Yeah, this is great. This is great.
I always like the statement whenever Jesus spoke to Jairus, don't be afraid, just believe, she'll be healed. And it's so funny because obviously we know how it ends. But it's like, it's one of those things, and maybe I'm alone in this, but if Jesus went to me and said, don't be afraid, just believe, I would probably glare at Jesus so much and be like, are you kidding me right now? Don't be afraid, just believe. Like I am 100% afraid, at least a little bit, and believe, like, okay, like there's optimism and then there's like, I don't know what believing that someone literally like being revived right in front of me from death looks like. Like it takes a lot. It was a fight to get to like the point where I was like, yeah, I believe that God raised his son from the dead, because, that I can buy to some degree, but just like a person?
Mm.
What? No, you're crazy. And it's so funny because it seems like such a simple statement and it's so incredibly hard. But then it like, I mean, the past like 30-40 minutes have just shown that we do experience those moments in varying capacities. We just don't necessarily think of it as like, Jesus raising someone from the dead. It's opportunities being born of situations we thought were done.
Definitely.
Yeah, for me, I think feeling afraid doesn't help with anything. Like for me, after I get rejected with my visa and I feel so desperate, I've been that fear feeling for a couple of days. And I cried a lot during those couple of days. And then I realized it doesn't help with anything. And I even messed up with my job. I made lots of mistakes. But otherwise, if I keep believing, at least I can move forward. I can focus on my day-to-day life. Whatever direction I go, I'm moving and moving slowly. I don't know if it's the gospel or not. It's like a very foggy day. You have to focus on your current step instead of worrying about which direction it leads to be.
Mhm.
Yeah.
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 I definitely, even to kind of elaborate a little bit with what Josue was sharing, just that idea of like, do we think that God said no, or are we going to wait for that miracle? Specifically with that, I like to think about how sometimes I can believe or think in my head, like, oh, there's no hope for this person to be saved, because they've made it very clear. Like, I think about my brother and sister and how they grew up, them being the age that they are, they got to witness a lot of things that has led them to believe that there is no such thing as a God. And it can be very easy for me to like get in my head of thinking like, okay, no matter how many times I've prayed, no matter how many times I've tried to share my faith with them or be led by the Spirit, that, it's dead. Like, there's no point in me continuing to have hope that they'll come to God. And I can get into that kind of like pity, like self-pity, just like, there's no hope. All is forfeited. But then there's also, in that, like what Jesus said, oh, simply have faith, just believe, and trusting in his timing, and that they could just be going through a time of sleeping, is what I like to think about. Like, oh, they're just asleep right now. And then before you know it, Jesus is going to come into their lives and be like, wake up. And you're like, oh, to which I am very much looking forward to that day. But I think sometimes we can get that in our head of like, oh, it's dead, it's done. When God didn't necessarily say no. There are definitely some doors that were closed. Like, we know those doors, like we talked about with job stuff, but there's other situations where, that door could have been closed, but not really closed. Like, not closed by God, if that makes any sense. And those are the things that we can believe that God is going to do what he wants to do in his time.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think keeping a hope will help us to build a strong faith, because if we put the hope in God, then we will put more trust in him and keep praying every day.
Yeah, very true. Cool.
All right.
Awesome.
Okay, that's all for today's discussion. Thanks for watching. If anyone is watching on the YouTube, we're going to end it for today. Everyone say bye.
Bye, YouTube.
Waving for 1 minute.